Mr. President, I'd like to thank you very much, and we'll speak to you very soon and probably see you again very soon. Thank you very much, Vladimir.
Next time in Moscow.
Oh, that's an interesting one. I don't know. I'll get a little heat on that one, but I could see it possibly happening. Thank you very much, Vladimir. And thank you all. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
In the 7 months since he became president, President Trump has never once put any pressure whatsoever on Russia to reach a deal.
President Zelensky of Ukraine has said he'll be heading to Washington and that he backs Donald Trump's proposal for a trilateral meeting between the US, Russia and Ukraine. What chance of that happening? Well, let's ask Leigh Turner, former UK ambassador to Ukraine. Hello, Leigh Turner. Thank you very much for joining us. What exactly do you think will happen then?
It's a fascinating situation we're in, isn't it, Kate? After this, as you said on your program, the non-event of the summit, where we saw a lot of backslapping and handshaking and warm smiles between President Trump and President Putin, but no substance. We heard President Putin again making his maximalist demands for what he calls a long-term settlement to eliminate the primary causes of the conflict, which is Russian code for Ukraine must cease to exist as an independent country. And we had President Trump talking about progress, and yet no ceasefire was announced. So,
but seriously, did you expect it to be? It was a bit. He set himself up there for a fall, didn't he, by saying that? Because before he said that, no one was thinking that was going to be the result of this meeting.
Absolutely right. I was speaking on Times Radio just a couple of days ago, actually, that in the 7 months since he became president, President Trump has never once put any pressure whatsoever on Russia to reach a deal. And you may remember he said if there was no ceasefire at this summit, there will be very severe consequences for Russia. And of course, now, after all that backslapping and hugging and so on, we are not going to see any new sanctions on Russia. And so, of course, the prospects of any progress are zero. Now, President Zelensky of Ukraine, of course, is playing the best of a bad hand in saying he's ready to meet trilaterally, although the Russians have said that's not going to happen, or at least they've not said it will happen. He's going to meet, Zelensky is going to meet President Trump on Monday. That's great news. He's grateful for the invitation. What Zelensky is trying to do here is to demonstrate that he is up for a deal. He's up for a deal to stop the fighting.
Which he's done all along, isn't it?
He's been doing that ever since the ghastly slow-motion car crash of his meeting with Trump in the Oval Office in February, when he politely questioned exactly how they were going to reach an agreement with President Putin. And he was savaged by President Trump and by Vice President J.D. Vance. So now Zelensky never asks any difficult questions, but just says, right, I'm ready. If you've got some suggestions, let's hear them. But we're not yet hearing any suggestions.
And it's why it's quite galling when you get the kind of comments pointed at Zelensky saying it's now up to him to get it done, to make it happen. And, he's been trying to do only that.
Absolutely right. What we have been worried about, what people who want a fair and reasonable outcome to this war have been worried about, is that President Trump seems very inclined to make a deal over the heads of the Ukrainians, make a bilateral deal with Russia, and then to put pressure on Ukraine to agree to it. And we heard in Trump's interview with Fox News after this yesterday's summit that Trump is still talking about land swaps. And really, in a way, one thing that Trump said is right, which is it's now up to Europe to stand firm and to support Ukraine. And that means economic and military support to Ukraine to prevent Russia winning this war. And secondly, they need to support the key principle, which seems to mean nothing to President Trump, of territorial integrity and the idea that you can't change borders by force. Because if that happens, none of us are safe.
So just tell us what you think diplomatically Europe could do now? Because there's a very different approach from what we saw in Alaska of this kind of personality diplomacy that was supposed to be taking place.
We're seeing very much that President Trump appears to like to negotiate with other people he sees as being big men, as in the case of President Putin. He seems to think that President Putin is a guy he can do business with. President Trump seems to be very much focused on potential future economic opportunities. President Trump has always been interested in doing deals which have an economic side to them. And the Europeans, by contrast, and indeed President Zelensky, are focused on this idea that you mustn't change international borders by force, because if you do that, you will encourage Russia to launch further attacks on its neighbors, whether it's Kazakhstan or Moldova or perhaps even the Baltic states. You'll encourage every other country around the world to start launching wars of territorial expansion, whether it's China invading Taiwan or Venezuela invading Guyana or somebody in Africa invading their neighbors. And this will be a disaster for all of our security, including US security, because we'll be living in a more dangerous world where we have to increase our military spending. So it's really important that Europe is able to step up to support Ukraine militarily and economically to try and prevent a really bad deal being reached over the future of Ukraine, of a kind that President Trump seems all too ready to agree to.
This call that President Zelensky has had with Donald Trump, this lasted more than an hour and a half. And he says that Europeans discussed positive signals from the US on security guarantees from Ukraine. How encouraged are you by that? And how significant do you see that as being?
Okay, that's a really encouraging little detail in there. We don't know much about this. From February, we have seen the US consistently saying that they will not play a role in guaranteeing any security deal in future, but to guarantee a peace deal or a ceasefire between Ukraine and Russia. The US have repeatedly ruled that out. They've said this is up to Europe and other countries to do, and then they've rubbished European suggestions for a reassurance force made by the UK and France in particular. So if that has now shifted and the US is prepared to guarantee a peace deal, that's enormously important news. Unfortunately, we only have it kind of third hand via President Zelensky talking about what President Trump said to him in private. So we really should interrogate that and see if the US is serious about providing security guarantees for a peace deal. Let's hope they are.
Leigh Turner, great to speak to you. Thank you for your time this morning. That's Leigh Turner, former UK ambassador to Ukraine.